Serious, how would you react if the US government decided that the American imperial units will be replaced by the metric system? So you don't realize that they did this in the 70s? The US government went metric back then, but made it voluntary for the rest of us. That's why there are metric units on food. The people rejected it. It's still the official standard, however. Here in the UK, the Weights and Measurements Act 1985 forced the use of the metric system for all commercial entities except in some specific circumstances, pints of beer for instance. Some rural petrol station owners were even prosecuted for refusing to sell by the liter. The long-term benefit of this is that the nation mostly understands both systems pretty well, except for the older generation who only use imperial. British people tend to refer to someone's height in feet and inches, their weight in stone. We use miles for long distances, but yards are barely used for measuring distance, however inches might be used for small lengths. It's a bit of a mixed bag. I worked in Sweden for about a year and would often reference a measurement in imperial, leaving a confused look on someone's face. Using imperial for any sort of manufacturing is ridiculous though. Well, except for the older generation who only use imperial. My 93-year-old Nan always scoffs at this. She always asks in a lovely South Wales accent, "Who are these idiots who can't work out different numbers, even after all these years?" She thinks those people shouldn't be allowed out the house for their own safety. I think the difficulty people have isn't so much the maths of metric, but more just lacking an inherent understanding of the sizes of the measurements. For example, many people who grew up using miles gets an ingrained understanding of roughly how far a mile is. Tell an adult to use a different measurement, like a kilometer, and they struggle to get the same ingrained understanding of how far that is, even if they understand that a kilometer is 1,000 meters. In the Midwest we measure distance in hours. About 10 years ago I moved from St. Louis, Missouri to Washington, D.C. In D.C., the city of Baltimore, it's about 40 miles away, and there are another 4 major cities including New York within 200 miles. I once told a local around here that in St. Louis the nearest major city is Memphis, which is 250 miles away. They asked me if it was all just suburbs in between the two cities. I laughed and told them it was mostly corn. Hey, don't forget endless, rolling hills of trees. Ha ha, hello from another SDL native. It really is a beautiful drive to go south on 55 to New Orleans. We did it a few times and I wish I had done it more. Edit, I miss Ted Drews. Us auto manufacturing could finally embrace the Japanese trend of making every goddamn bolt 10mm. Fun fact, most American domestic vehicles are metric already. Yup. That's why I have a dozen 10mm sockets and still can't find them. I'm convinced some engineer somewhere sold his soul to the devil to standardize most bolts to be 10mm, and now the curse is that the sockets seem to vanish. There is definitely a demon somewhere hoarding 10mm. Engineering student. I'd be thrilled. Same. It would be a pain in the machine shop though. Most lathes, drill presses, vertical mills, etc. use thousands of an inch as standard measurements. That's just a parameter in the controller though. Even American machine tool builders don't build specific as customary measurement machines. Edit, this is a stupid amount of karma for this comment. Tell that to the giant engraved dial on the machine. We have a single CNC lathe. Everything else is manual, and all the readouts are analog. And all of them are in imperial units. That would be tough to change. Heads up, you can get a Dro retrofitted pretty cheap and it'll switch at the touch of a button. We have a couple of 48 vertical borers, with hand wheels all in imperial. We do imperial and metric work on them but just switch units on the Dro depending on the job. It's useful to be able to work comfortably in both units. In the UK we like to chop and change to keep things exciting. Short distances, cm, your height, feet rooms, feet and or meters long distance of speed, miles except if you're running 5-10k, marathons are still miles pop, petrol, vodka and other liquids, liter milk and beer pints yards on a football pitch keeps you on your toes. Don't forget stone for weight. As someone who lives in America, I never even heard of a stone until I had to submit my weight for a health analysis edit typo. Measuring weight in pounds and not stone is like measuring height in inches and not feet. But I usually hear something like my height is 180 centimeters rather than my height is 1.8 meters edit. Looks like this is language specific thing. A lot of people in Ukraine also say 1.8, but for 1.85 meters I've seen that 185 centimeters is more popular. Maybe because there is no significant difference between phrases and. In the Netherlands we do say 184, 1,84. But we don't say meters after it. I'm an American living in Europe, so I'm surrounded by the metric system. If the US changed, I think it would take a lot of effort to change every speed limit sign and road sign in the country lol, but other than that eventually we'd get used to it. My Google Maps is still set to miles and my weather apps are still set to Fahrenheit, but I can guesstimate if I have to tell someone something in kilometers or Celsius. Don't bother changing them. In the UK we have speed limits in mile per hour, but pretty much everything else is metric. Also pints for proper ale, but our pints are different to us ones. I live in Ireland, and today I'll get to see the road signs change from km to miles as I go up to Derry. Big fan of imperial pints since they're bigger than us pints for whatever reason. Because everybody and their goddamn dog had their own definition of the gallon over the last few hundred years. The US ended up picking a different one than the UK. You guys are blowing my mind. I was always taught that a pint is a pound the world round, meaning, a pint of water weighs a pound everywhere. But, how can that be true if ours are bigger than yours? That's not a pint in our system. That's true for your system, which is quite based around the density of water. I think that's clever, honestly. Basic H2O, found literally everywhere, it's a perfect medium. Freezes at 0 C, boils at 100 C. 1 pint is 1 pound in fluid ounces at water density. Makes more sense, emo. Open a shop that converts speedometers. Our speedometers already have km on them, just in smaller lettering than mile per hour. A lot have the option to just switch the computer over to metric. I know the 01Z06 Corvette could do it, and my 06 Chevy can do it. Probably most cars with anything more than a basic trip computer can just switch display to entirely metric. So a while back I was in the US, and it was one of those. It will only be 2 weeks with an extra week being added on at a time. So I was there for 3 to 4 months. Because it was well going home soon, every so many weekends we would hire a car and go somewhere because everything isn't really that far, by Australian standards. One weekend we hired a Charger and drove to New Orleans. On the way down I was messing with the car settings and found it could be changed to metric, which was awesome for us. So we got to New Orleans, much drinking etc. Car got a flat and they didn't come with a proper spare plus, so we had to take it to one of the rental place chain stores and change cars. When we returned it I forgot it was in metric and the attendant freaked the FK out. Realizing what had happened we said, oh, it's in metric, we can switch it back if you like, and some years later I still remember it as the most offended, insulted sounding, if you wouldn't mind, that I have ever heard still. I tell everyone who visits the US who rents a car to switch it to metric before they return it now. To be fair, that attendant just sounds like a moron lol. I'm guessing it was the large discrepancy between the reported mileage when it was rented compared to the mileage when they brought it back. I wouldn't mind, but I'm like 99% sure there would be riots. Not sure why, just seems like there would be. A small percent of extremely vocal people would protest. They'd show up in the streets with guns and call it socialism. Using metric would be infringing on their freedoms, somehow. The news would run this for a week or two, pushing nonsense arguments into everyone's faces. Most Americans would be slightly annoyed and confused. A large minority would be happy about it. Imagine someone patrolling the streets protesting metric units with their favorite gun chambered in 5.56 millimeters. As non-American, I don't get bothered by your units. I just wonder why you haven't changed them so far. Especially that in science you don't use nanoinches or microounces, you just apply normal metric units. What is the most ridiculous is your date format and Fahrenheit temperature. Nanoinches and microounces, I'm dead. Microounce will be my street name if I ever happen to end up on that route. Anyone wanna be my partner in crime? MRMRS nanoinch. Not sure why you added the Mr. there. There's no man on earth that wants to be known as Mr. Nanoinch. Mr. Nanoinch here. It's not a name you choose, it's a name you earn. I could finally do 100 on the interstate without fear of getting pulled over. Your 0 to 60 drops massively too. I was going to make a smartass remark about metric time but remembered that it's actually a thing. A second is still a second, but you get to reference time with metric prefixes suffixes. So next time you're being asked to do something, just say sure, just give me a megasecond, and you've bought yourself just over 11 to 12 days. Astronomers use metric times a lot, kilomega second exposure times, and megagiga years for ages of things.